Thanks for joining us today. I'm Janice Klein's Marketing Coordinator for AOE, and today I'm speaking with Amy Numbers, Vice President of Operations for AOE. We're going to be going over what are the steps to host a successful webinar. Hi, Amy. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for hosting, Janice. I appreciate it.
No problem. I'm happy to have you. So can you go ahead and start this off? Tell us what we need to do.
Absolutely. Give you a little background. I recently reviewed a benchmarking report from a firm. It's a webinar technology firm called ON24, and they were presenting 2021 webinar trends. While the trends themselves were interesting, I thought it would be a good idea to share these trends, not only these trends, but steps to hosting a successful webinar.
Great. So how do we get started with the webinar process?
I'm going to share my screen. Hosting a webinar is all about the planning, and AOE has hosted many webinars over the last several years, and I've broken the process down into 8 steps. The first step is planning your webinar. Planning your webinar is to understand who your audience is. Make sure that the content is targeted to the folks you're presenting to.
Okay, so why is this important? Why do we need to know this?
Well, if you skip this step, all your time and effort could go to waste, and all the great content that you're planning could get promoted to the wrong audience.
Gotcha.
And I'm going to go along here. The second step is to figure out your topic. Webinars provide great format for focusing a specific topic or industry trend. They also provide opportunities to showcase the knowledge your organization has to share. So this next step is to brainstorm topics that you feel will address the specific needs of your target audience and position you as a leading authority in the industry.
Okay, so is this the best time in the planning process to determine what webinar format to use?
That's a very good question. Yes, while you're brainstorming your topics, don't forget to consider the webinar type and format. In other words, will you be planning a live webinar or more of an on-demand format? Your presentation choice is important and will help you with the rest of the planning process.
So you know who your audience is and you know what format is best for this audience. What's the next step?
Well, the next step is actually to put a date on the calendar for the webinar and start promoting it.
What day of the week do you recommend? Is there a better than other days to host a webinar?
Yeah, actually, that's one of the bits of information that came out in that trends report that I was mentioning earlier. It was revealed, and you can see here on my screen, that Thursdays followed by Wednesdays and then Tuesdays are actually the best days for webinar attendance.
That's interesting information. How about promotion? What are the best ways to let your audience know about your webinar?
So a great webinar with awesome content means nothing if you do not have an audience to share it with. So promoting your webinar is just as important as preparing for it. Your marketing plan for your webinar should include multiple channels. For instance, your organization's website, your organization's social media platforms, as well as email marketing. In the same benchmarking report that I keep referring to, it was determined that the most popular days to send these promotional emails is Tuesdays, followed by Wednesdays, and then Thursdays. And you can see here, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, they're all very close in percentage-wise. It's not like it's an overwhelming number one day or the other, but it does give you a good idea of when to send out those promotional emails. Another bit of information that I found interesting was that in 2021, 34% of attendee registrations occurred 8 days or more in advance of the webinar, with the highest number of registrations occurring between 1 and 7 days prior to the event. So it's one of those, people signed up at the last minute, so don't forget to promote that last week before your webinar.
That's good advice. Great information when promoting your webinar. So what's the next step?
Well, the next step is to practice. Practicing your webinar gives you an opportunity to refine the presentation and work through any technical issues that you might have on the day of the presentation. And speaking of the presentation, step 5 is actually to host your webinar. Make sure that you give yourself extra time before the event to check your equipment to make sure it's up and running smoothly. And with all of us on Zoom and Teams, we have last minute audio issues or visual or video issues. So make sure those are all, those kinks are all worked out. We recommend starting at least no more than 30 minutes before the webinar begins. And that gives you about, extra time to run through your material as well.
Is there anything we should be doing after the webinar is over?
Oh, yes. We still have more work to do after the webinar is over. After the webinar is complete, step 6 includes taking time to review feedback from your attendees, as well as analyze registration and attendance numbers to determine how you can improve in the future. That trends report that I keep talking about actually noted that 55% of registrants actually converted into an attendee, which is pretty awesome numbers.
Is there anything else that we need to do after the webinar is over?
Yep, there sure is. Our 7th step involves repurposing the content. Just because you are hosting the webinar on a particular day and date, it doesn't mean that it's the only time that this webinar can be seen. You can publish the webinar on your website for on-demand viewing, and make sure you promote it through your emails and social media posts so other people can find it. And finally, our step 8, which perhaps is one of the most important steps, is to have a post-webinar strategy to help turn your leads into potential customers. One example is to send a thank you email to everyone who did and did not attend your webinar. Include a summary of the highlights of the webinar and a link where it can be reviewed and downloaded. A thank you email is an important opportunity to turn people who missed your webinar into active leads. It also helps keep your webinar in the front of people's minds, continuing your engagement with them. We recommend that you do this as quickly as possible within at least 2 days of the webinar.
That's great information. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today and going over this. I think our audience will get a lot of use out of this. We really appreciate it. This webinar will also be on our website, aoeteamwebinars.com, so you can view it there as often as you would like. Thanks, Amy, for sitting down with me today. I really appreciate it.
Of course, and Janice, if I can remind the viewers that AOE, like I mentioned, we have done multiple, well, more than multiple, many webinars, and we can certainly help if an organization wants to get started with the process.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you for hosting, Janice.